Hey y'all, welcome to AllieCat Customs. This is my very first video in my how-to series. And today I did an all types on this 454, and I figured I'd bring y'all along as I investigate to see what happened to this engine and if anything on this engine is actually salvageable for rebuild. So if you have an engine that you want to rebuild and you're not sure if anything is salvageable in the engine or worth trying to rebuild, maybe I can help you walk through the process so that you can get your engine ready to rebuild. So let's get started. Oh, and trust me, this one was a very interesting one. So to start off, let's lay a couple ground rules. If you have an engine with window holes in the block or in the oil pan, or you drag the engine from the creek somewhere, then you probably already know that the engine has some catastrophic damage inside, and most likely there's going to be very few salvageable parts in there. If your engine started smoking, or it lost oil pressure, or started rattle or knock, or if it's an engine that you know nothing about, but it looks generally to be in decent shape from the outside, then it's time for some investigation. My 454 here lost oil pressure, it lost power, and it started knocking. I shut it down before it seized or it slung a rod, so hopefully it's not too hurt. I visually inspected the outside of the block and the oil pan, and I see no holes, which is a good sign. So now it's time to drain the oil and see what it looks like. So upon looking at my oil, it looks pretty good. I didn't see any metal shavings in it, and it didn't come out looking like milkshake. If your oil comes out looking like chocolate milkshake, or if because the engine sat for a long time and water comes out first before the oil does, or then that means that the engine ingested water at some point into the crankcase. And if you see metal shavings coming out in the oil, that's a good chance that something inside that spins became very unhappy and started shedding itself into the oil pan. So be on the lookout for that. All right, so after you drain your oil, the next clue will be what's in the oil filter. I have this pretty neat little cutting tool, so I can cut up an oil filter and inspect them. If you want one of these, they're fairly cheap and good to have. Mine is a Proform brand. I got it from Jegs for like $40. So it's dirt simple. It's just like a very large pipe cutter, and you use it just like you would cutting a pipe. Clamp it down and spin it, and it cuts the filter in two. So about to bust this filter open and see what's inside. Oh man, yep. It's definitely sparkly. I mean, it's not terrible. There's just some debris, some sparkles, but it's enough to confirm. Yep. Okay, so we definitely have a very unhappy engine. I'm gonna pull it apart and go ahead and put it on a stand, and we'll get it apart and look for any damage. All right, so now that I got this big block snatched out of that truck and sitting on the engine stand, I'll start by tearing it apart and inspecting. Now, how you do these steps is up to you. I'm trying to film a YouTube video while I'm in the middle of my engine autopsy, so I'm taking longer and more deliberate steps to show you, so I can show you all the process. I'm also doing this from the perspective of somebody that's wanting to do a full rebuild, so I'll be completely gutting this engine all the way down to the bottom and starting over. All right, so after I got my valve covers off, I did an initial inspection on my top of my engine, and I'm not seeing anything actually really wrong with the top of the engine. Everything looks great. The underside of my valve covers looks great. This is a solid lift cam, so there will be slack. They're designed so they have slack on the base circle. So other than just the normal amount of slack that you feel, everything looks good. The push rods all look to be in place. I'm not seeing any obvious valve spring damage. But so when you're pulling the engine off, when you pull the valve covers off, look, and if you see any rocker arms that have a massive amount of slack, then that means that you either have a cam lobe went flat, a collapsed lifter, or you have a bent push rod or something like that. So something to check out. You can also look at your stud nuts and see if any of them are too high or too low. That'll give a good indication that somebody tried to fix a hurt engine before you got a hold of it. So that's something to check out there. But top end of mine looks pretty good. So my next step is I'm gonna pull the intake off, because on the intake you can actually see down inside the center and see the cam, see if I have anything hurt on that. And if I don't see anything there, I'm gonna roll over, pull the pan, and see if I found my culprit in the bottom end. So moving on to the next step. So yeah, I know I'm already looking at a torn apart engine. That's because this is future Michael telling past Michael, hey dude, you forgot something, because he was so excited to tear this engine apart that you forgot a very basic and fundamental first step on how to diagnose an engine. Because as I previously said, I know I'm going to tear it all the way down to the very bottom. I forgot to pull the spark plugs out because I knew I was pulling the heads off anyway, and that's all that was on my radar. But for those of y'all that are trying to diagnose engine problems on an engine, like I said, that you don't know what's wrong with it, your spark plugs are really the first step to look at, because they give you an indication of what's inside your cylinder, your combustion chambers. So if you have any kind of engine damage, you have oil deposits from a fouled out plug, from you could have oil deposits stuck on the spark plug that would indicate that you had either oil getting in past your rings, or from the valve seals in the top of the head leaking oil in. If you have actual damage on the spark plug, then that means something, either a piston or something busted and started smashing itself around inside the combustion chamber, or something fell in from the top side and messed your engine up on the inside. So I'm about to snatch my spark plugs out and check them, even though I was literally just going to pull the head off and look at it anyways. All right, so after looking these spark plugs over, I'm not seeing any real bad damage. This is the worst spark plug, and it's just some wet fouling. All the plugs had a little wet fouling on them. That's indication that the engine's running rich or is burning a little oil. If you're looking at the plugs and you find plugs that have a lot of buildup of soot on top of the electrode and stuff like that, that's a real bad oiling issue. Different colors can indicate, coolant getting in it, or in a weird case, you can actually have transmission fluid coming in from your vacuum modulator on a transmission. I've seen that, and that was a very interesting find to figure that one out. But yeah, it's a good indication as far as from looking at my spark plugs. I'm not seeing any damage so far on mine, but I'm about to let y'all catch up as I'm about to pull the heads off this and see if I can actually find any damage, and keep on moving on to the next step. So y'all have fun getting to here. I'm already here. All right, so as you can see, I got my intake pulled off, and looking down in the lifter valley here, there's actually drain holes that line up with the top of your cam, and gives you pretty good windows to be able to see your cam lobes. And I'm not seeing any damage on my initial inspection looking down through here. If a cam lobe's really bad, you could actually tell it from looking through those windows. So since I'm not seeing any obvious damage, I'm gonna go ahead and pull my valve train off the top here, pull the rocker arms off, pull the push rods out, and then pull the lifters out. And being a flat tappet cam like this is, it actually has a flat surface that rides on the cam, so you could tell if it's went bad and started flattening the cam lobe. So start tearing down now. All right, so as you can see, I got my valve train all removed from my engine, pulled my rocker arms, pulled the push rods, and pulled the lifters out. And I still have not found any damage on the top side of my engine. All the lifters pulled cleanly. If you have a lifter that will not pull cleanly out of the lifter bore, do not force it. That is just bad news and cause a lot of damage to your engine block. That's a machine surface that your lifter is riding on inside the block. So if you have a lifter that's stuck, you already found your problem. You know you got to rebuild the engine. So pull the lifter as high as it'll go without forcing it. And then you can go ahead and pull the cam out. And once you get the cam out, you can just push the lifter back down, and it'll fall out the bottom side of the engine, into the oil pan, you already got to take it apart anyways. So when you get the oil pan off, you can fish your bad lifter out then. But all of mine come out the top side, they all felt fine. I had one, when I pulled it out, it felt just a slight drag, but when I looked at the top side of it, everything looked clean on the top side. And I mean, it looked like it was still runnable at this point. I'll know more about that when I pull the cam out and inspect the cam lobes, but that all worked fine. As far as laying the parts out, you know, especially on a flat tappet cam, if you're going to try to reuse a flat tappet cam, you have to run the lifters in the spots they came out of. So make sure you line everything out, know where it came from to put it back in. Push rods and your rocker arms and stuff like that. You know, it's generally nicer to keep them in line where they need to go and stuff anyways. So it's good to just lay your stuff out, organize it that way. If you start to see a problem, you can go by and see, hey, I had a problem, you know, on this cylinder, so I need to go back and look at the rest of my parts and see where the problem came from. Just helps to be organized. So that's all I got for the top side right here. I'm about to snatch the front of this motor off, pull the cam out, pull the heads off, keep inspecting. That's all I can find. Pretty soon I'll have a bare block and I can start putting them back together. That'll be a good thing. All right, so I got my cam pulled out and looks to be in pretty good shape. This is a flat tappet solid lift camshaft. And what flat tappet means is instead of having a roller, the end of the lifter is flat and it actually rides on the cam lobe, and that's what makes your valves open. And so looking on this, when you're working on one, or when the one's operating, it don't sit square like this, it sits off to the side. And as the cam runs and moves it up and down over the nose, it actually will spin the lifter around in its bore so it gets proper oiling. When those get worn, you'll actually have the lifter bore here, you get concave, and it'll start to, you know, dish out as it eats material off, and the nose of the cam will wear on the sides and roll over, and instead of looking like a nice tall egg like that, it'll start to look more like a round flat cam lobe, and that's what you call a flat cam lobe on a cam like this. Mine looks pretty good, so if the engine wasn't hurt, I'd have kept running this for a whole lot longer. But I'm not going to reuse it on my build. But if your cam looks like this in the motor, I mean, you can still run a setup like this. So I'm going to move on to the next step and see if I can find more damage. All right, so I got as you can see, I got the heads taken off, and everything looks great. Head gaskets and all look great. Didn't find any coolant in the inside the combustion chambers. Inside to the cylinder walls look great from what I can see so far. Head gaskets look pretty good. Because I ran straight water with a water wetter formula for racing on the track, so I wouldn't run any antifreeze in here. I have a lot of gunk in my cooling system, and that shows up on the head gaskets. But it wasn't a problem to get nothing to hurt the inside of the engine. So that's the next thing to check. Checking your heads, or checking this part. And on mine, everything looks great. Still don't have any damage to show y'all. So we'll continue moving on and go to the bottom end, and we may find a culprit there. So far, this engine is definitely rebuildable. Put this down and get the motor spun over. We'll take the oil pan off and see if we can go to the bottom side and find some damage. That's not supposed to happen. Well, there's something inside my oil pan that is definitely unhappy. All right then. That's interesting. Wow, this video went off the rails real quick. So as you saw, as I was rolling the engine over to inspect the bottom end, I heard something was loose and rolling around in the oil pan. That turned out to be the pickup tube to the oil pump that fell off because the bracket that attached it broke. What a disaster. When I decided to make this video, I was expecting to find damage due to abuse. I was expecting to find a cam lobe that went flat, broken rocker arms, a piston that lifted a ring land, or spun rod bearings. This engine was abused and ran so hard. So I was hoping to show y'all damage and what to expect when you tear down a motor. I gotta tell you, in a million years, I could not have scripted this. It took me a few days to collect my thoughts and figure out how to finish this video. So here it goes. I think this is an even better lesson than I could ever imagined. So get this, when I posted this truck for sale, I was very honest and I told everyone that was interested in this truck that the engine was hurt. My statement to everyone was that the engine lost power, the oil pressure started fluttering, and it started rattling. It wasn't knocking, but it was definitely hurt and it would need a full rebuild. While I was taking this engine apart, I knew that it was hurt, so I was looking real hard to find any sign of damage. But everything I touched seemed to be in perfect working order, so it wasn't making any sense at all to me until I rolled the engine over and saw the pickup tube missing. This got me to thinking, what if somebody bought this truck? What if I would have bought this truck? Would I have caught this, or would the top-end inspection have betrayed me? Would I have even tried to crank this engine up? So I had to think about it as if I wasn't the one that actually saw and heard this engine hurt itself. This engine spun bearings on 6 out of 8 rods, but looking at the oil filter, it wasn't obvious that anything had happened. Yeah, I saw some glitter, but with 6 spun rod bearings, that filter should have been slammed full of material. This engine sat completely untouched for over 2 years. But when I pulled the valve covers, there was oil sitting inside the heads. And when I pulled the rockers and the lifters, they all had oil on them and they looked great. So it certainly didn't look like there was anything that the engine had lost oil or anything on the top end. The oil pump is partially submerged in oil when it's sitting still. So I bet if you pulled the distributor and tried to prime this engine, you might have actually seen oil come to the top, and it might have even gotten oil pressure. So I'm not even sure if that test would have passed or failed this engine. When I pulled the plugs, they looked fine. Sure, they were gas soaked, but this engine's always run rich, and it was running really rough before it died, so that was to be expected. When I pulled the cylinder heads off the block, even the cylinder walls themselves looked great. So if you was looking at the top of this engine, you would likely think that it was ready to run, but almost immediately after cranking it, you would find out that it was definitely hurt, and possibly could have been catastrophic if one of these rods decided to come apart. As it sits right now, my block looks rebuildable. It didn't spin any mains, and the cylinder walls look great. The crank, however, is questionable and will need to get checked out. Where the rod bearing spun, it looks like it's in pretty bad shape. And likely I would probably replace it anyways, because it probably got pretty hot from the spun rod bearings. The rods and pistons, they're all junk. But when you do a performance style rebuild anyways, you're going to toss those, so that's no big loss. The cam looks barely even broke in, and it probably would have been just fine. And if you wanted to gamble on it, you'd probably do just fine to be able to run it. I won't, simply because I'm not really a fan of flat tappet cams, and I'm surely not a fan of reusing flat tappet cams once they've been pulled out of the engine. So what's my takeaway from this whole ordeal? Well, you never know what to expect when you start to tear down an engine for rebuild. Each engine has a unique story to tell. So take your time, have an open mind, and enjoy the process. As you start taking the engine apart, document everything. That way, when you have some crazy situation happen like I had, you aren't sitting there questioning yourself and what you saw beforehand. Trust me, it is a very weird feeling when something completely unexpected happens and you end up just standing there looking all dumbfounded. As you can imagine, I am still shaking my head over how this engine got hurt over something so dumb. And to think, I bought that oil pan because I wanted the added insurance to make sure that I didn't hurt this engine due to oil control issues. And I bought that pan specifically because it was cheap enough that I wouldn't be really upset if I kicked the rods out of this engine while drag racing it and destroy it. And because the pickup tube, it looked pretty beefy with that nice little bracket to help secure the pickup tube to the oil pump. I know, I should have tack welded the tube to the pump, but I never in a million years would have thought that that bracket would fail, and certainly not fail within just under a year of use. I mean, come on, that is the absolute most frustrating part of this whole situation. Anyways, I've babbled enough about this. It's time to get this mess cleaned up and hopefully get this block right here or my spare 454 ready for rebuild. I hope y'all found this video helpful, or at least was entertained by the train wreck that this video became. Hopefully you did, and if so, leave me a comment. I gotta know, what would you have done when you found the old pickup tube had broke off? Also, after seeing how clean the top of the engine was, would you have thought that the bottom end was trashed as badly as it was? If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff so you can keep up with all the adventures right here at AllieCat Customs.